But in that same context, they're trying to bring this impeachment trial and gaslight people into believing something that's just not the case. And the same people, Schumer, McConnell, who, standing up for the Constitution is why they couldn't allow a meaningful election contest, even though that violated the plain language of the Constitution and its history, are now turning around and telling you the plain language of the Constitution allows them to do something that nobody in the history of impeachment in any English jurisdiction for 300 plus years has said was constitutional. So, problematic.
Do you think I have a hyperactive imagination when I say that they might actually try to say, well, even if we don't convict because it requires 2/3, we can still vote to bar from office because all we need is a majority?
That's absolutely where they're going. Yes. It's another ludicrous proposition. So different people had proposed to the president suing in advance. He's picked a lawyer out of South Carolina. There are a lot of locals questions about that lawyer. I don't know him. I have no idea about him. So don't know whether he's good, bad, sideways, whatever. Only thing I know is that he has some political connections to the McConnell world. To the Lindsey Graham world, not McConnell. So we'll see. But I mean, it's really ridiculous. I mean, this is like when going back to your statement about giving people a chance. Biden had an easy chance just by taking this off the table because he shouldn't even be present constitutionally anyway. And he did not. He didn't have to rush through on executive orders where he had constitutionally dubious authority, but he did so anyhow. He didn't have to pursue his most aggressive, controversial policy positions, but he did within 24 hours anyway. He did the same rules for you, rules for thee, but not rules for me. On the same day, he issues 4 different anticipated mask mandates of having all the executive branches look at it. He's not wearing a mask on federal property himself. So it's poor form, and it shows where they're at. It shows how completely in denial that they're at, in my view. They don't understand what happened politically, and I'll talk about that more with Richard Barris later in the week. But from a legal perspective, there will be some early constitutional challenges to the reinstatement of DACA, to the immigration issues related to Texas, to these mask mandates once the different executive branch officials put them through. There's also a constitutional question there. Remember when all the media went crazy about how if Trump ever had somebody in a cabinet position that hadn't been approved by the Senate yet? Well, that's almost all of Biden's cabinet people currently. These acting cabinet secretaries that are none of them have been approved. I think only one so far has been.
It is enough to make you sick because it's a double standard. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. You can either say it's a double standard, but I like it because it's my double standard, or you're on the other side. You say it's a double standard and it's infuriating. I remember all this, and I've lived through it now firsthand as a conscious adult, and I won't forget it. And it's been an eye-opening, albeit somewhat discouraging thing to see. But I want to bring up this super chat because this is an interesting one. Getting back to the conviction and disqualification from office, this will happen now. Whether or not he gets convicted, this is the issue, is that he may not even get convicted by the 2/3 majority of the Senate, but they might still move to disqualify and say, well, he's not in office right now, so we don't need to we don't need to convict on the impeachment, but we can still disqualify. Then we say Senate will convict, then the DQ, then disqualify from running in 2024. Trump will appeal, but the Supreme Court won't hear until it's too late for Trump to run.
And there's several things there. One is apparently Chief Justice Roberts can't preside over the trial because the president's not on trial, which means, that just shows you how ridiculous it is, right? It shows you how the only people they have impeachment power over is the president, not ex-presidents, which Roberts is implicitly recognizing by refusing to participate because he's like, the president's not on trial. And what that would mean is that Kamala Harris could be presiding over a trial that would determine who could challenge her in 2024. And watch all the same people who are like, we're deeply concerned with the idea that Pence could have any role in an electoral contest because it impacts his own future vice presidency, not say a word when Kamala Harris is presiding over who could actually challenge her in 2024. And so it'll be nice to see the David Frenchies of the world, the Ben Shapiros of the world. Many of them have been, grandstanding on the rule of law, keep their mouth shut about a lot of these things over the next couple of years. Ben Shapiro may not be as bad as Frenchie, but the National Review will be atrocious. All these people are a crock. But it'll be good education for the populist base to understand why they should have nothing to do with Federalist Society type lawyers. because many of them are unreliable. But there's several problems with it. One is the Senate can decide up front. They should force it to a vote whether or not they even have authority to do so, assuming that Trump doesn't sue in advance. My advice was to sue in advance, but okay. So, I mean, if he should have learned anything from the election lawsuits, always sue early and sue often, because otherwise they may complain down the road. Don't give them that excuse out of the back gate. But they could decide that. Then secondly, if they decide to acquit on those grounds, then they could argue that there's no ability to go forward, and that's a separate issue. Then even if the Senate, by hook or by crook, tries to bar him, that doesn't mean he has to recognize that. He could run and say, you, challenger, you say that I can't get sworn in. Or you, Congress, try to prevent me after the American people vote me in the next time. And that would be a problem for them. Would they all of a sudden then discover their constitutional obligation in a presidential election not to go along with what voters think? If they think that it can't be done constitutionally? I mean, that would be an interesting level of hypocrisy. But so it's not necessarily clear that Trump himself has to get clarity from the court in advance of his running. He can run and people can vote for him, because what they determined in the McCain and Obama cases was that the states have no authority to take someone off the ballot, even if the state official believes that person is not constitutionally qualified to be on the ballot. Because that was the question in both McCain and Obama. McCain was born in Panama. There was arguments about whether Obama was born within the United States at a time in which that was required for citizenship, because of the nature of how old his mom was. And the court said, no, we can't get involved with that. That's a political question. So doesn't that mean they can't get involved if Trump decides to run and Trump has to be on the ballot no matter what the Senate does, and then force him to take action in 2024? Of course, the president could also either sue before or after. And if the court refuses to get involved, say, well, so what? I gave the court a chance. They didn't. I'm going to run anyway. And let's see what happens. And the local official can't keep me off. So because technically it's not a bar from running for office, it's a bar from holding it. So it doesn't become a constitutional question until he's actually won. I've made this argument in a different context for someone who wanted to be on the ballot, though they were not of age for that particular office. And that's really how the Constitution was constructed, to resolve these kind of matters. But I think the Supreme Court might get involved, because there is a comparable that they could always do the political question nonsense. But Adam Clayton Powell in the mid-1960s was excluded from the House because the House didn't want him in, even though he'd won election. And he took it up, and the lower courts were all like, "Oh, political doctrine." They all their Pontius Pilate pretext. Wipe their hands. I can't get involved. Supreme Court overturned. All 9 justices ultimately agreed that it was not a political question. They did have jurisdiction, and 8-1, they said that Congress did not have the power to exclude someone who had been duly elected from the Congress. They could expel them later, but they didn't have the power to bar them. And so you would have a similar theory here. This isn't questioning how the Senate conducts itself. It's, does the Senate have the constitutional power to hold trials on people who are private citizens when the Bill of Attainder provision of the Constitution says they don't? And are we going to enforce that or not? And how many provisions will the court refuse to enforce? It's one thing not to get involved in an election. It's another thing to just completely hide out. They've taken a major reputational hit. So I think the courts would actually get involved. I understand people are like, courts suck, they're terrible, they're on a downer about courts. There are a lot of things to be critical of courts for, but that doesn't mean every court will be bad in every single case. There's just the example we're talking about this week of the German court in a jurisdiction that tends to be more deferential to the government, saying that the local lockdown rules make no sense whatsoever. So there's plenty of places and cases where the courts fight back, and hopefully at some point the courts will, if they get enough pushback. But yeah, it's a constitutional joke of a trial, and it makes a constitutional joke out of Congress that they're complicit in it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not that I'm listening to only one side of the aisle. I haven't heard any meaningful intellectual scholar say that there's anything justifiable about this, except the only people I hear saying that it's justifiable are politicians and the media. You got Dershowitz, you've got yourself, you've got Turley. I even think Legal Eagle said that there was nothing impeachable about the speech itself, in one of his videos. I haven't heard anybody say that there's anything actually constitutionally justifiable about what's being done. It is, and like you say, you give Biden a chance. Part of me was, saying you're giving him a good advice. Get up on that stand and say, this is unity. Don't impeach someone who got 75 million, half of American votes. But no. And
this is like the Pope in the 9th century who was ticked at one of the prior popes. So he brought out his dead corpse for a trial, because he was still ticked. It's like, that's what this looks like.
Is that true, Robert?
Yes, it's true. I mean, there's even paintings of it, of this corpse dressed up like the old Pope. I mean, he got the bones and the whole 9 yards, the whole skeleton, put him on the defense stand. This makes our system look like like a joke. And the fact that these people in D.C. don't understand that. I was at an event over in Utah last night doing a presentation for a group of people that are, citizens for constitutional government and concerned about keeping government in a limited and constricted by, big, huge crowd, packed out crowd. People were really curious and interested and engaged and want to make change and want to do something. And just by that attitude and the demeanor, Congress has completely misread the country. The country has not responded to, the shameful embarrassments of January 6th. We feel so terrible now we ever backed Trump. We apologize profusely, and we're happy that Schumer and Pelosi and McConnell and Biden and Harris are running the show. It is quite the contrary, is the mindset and mentality that's out in the countryside, and they don't understand it. And this joke of a trial is a classic example of that.
It is. I had said at the time of the first impeachment, I had never seen. I guess I had seen Clinton's, but I was not conscious. I was not informed enough to even know what to make of it. I saw this time around and said, this is clearly weaponizing of the impeachment process to the point where it's no longer going to be the nuclear weapon of political tools. It's now just going to be any ordinary tool, going to be used every time you want to do it. And it's to see this happen now. And it's in light of what the accusation is, makes it even more egregious. But to see this now, to see what they're trying to do now, the only people that can think this is a good idea are people with, I would say, not no conscience, but people who thrive off the divisiveness, or people who are so closed off by their own blinders and their own silos that they think people actually support this. And from what I understand and from what I've seen, a substantial amount of Trump haters do not support this either. And but
they were a classic example is they were interviewing this sort of liberal younger woman type and one of these local news outlets. And she was like, why are we impeaching someone who's no longer president? She said, this seems juvenile to me. And that gives you the kind of, it's a joke. It's juvenile. It's bitter. It comes across as, Tulsi Gabbard had a very interesting interview with Joe Rogan, where she talked about the greatest disappointment she had with Congress, in part, was how much it felt like high school. It was a bunch of people who had never grew up from high school, and they're still the mean girls, and they don't understand and this is who they are, and this is why our system is atrophying. It's not just that we have people whose moral compasses have long since been broken. It's people who are not intellectually capable of leadership. It's an argument, frankly, against representative government. I've always been more on the little d Democratic side. It's like the problem is what happens when your representative is not representative of the people they're supposed to be representing. The Senate is the millionaires club. Do we think a single senator represents the ordinary person in America, or is representative of the ordinary person? It's hard to see it.
No, and it's not just that. I mean, we've seen it here now. You see the courts, the politicians, and the system as a whole, and it is enough to what's the word? Not to discourage is the understatement of the year, but it's enough to cause people to lose faith. And
I understand that, and that's where I'm like, fire back, stronger and better than ever before. That's always the answer. The forfeiture is the only way the other side ever is guaranteed to win. But to be honest with you, it gives me more faith, because these are not worthy adversaries. These are incompetent kids who just need to be put in timeout. And that's who we have running our country. And they just all need a timeout. I mean, when you have someone like Biden who gets one tough question and his response is, come on, man. I mean, you're like, this guy's president? This is an embarrassment for America. So we just got to keep hammering away at it. And I'll be doing that this week on Monday. File a Supreme Court petition for a little guy who stood up to the system.